This video will contain some leaks. There will be a little bit of lore leak, but the game already hinted it to us anyway, so it's not necessarily that big of a deal. So today's video is interesting because I wrote this video way before Llama and Flints was teased, so yeah, it's all the way back in 5.8. Albeit, I do make some updates after Not Cry was out, and I finally get to experience this whole thing myself, and with Nefer's release, the whole gang is finally here. Well, we still have plenty of characters waiting in line, that being Columbina, Iglua, likely Nikita, and more than not, Nicole and the White Horse Adeptus, as they are hinted to be angels. That being said, I'll be including some of my personal opinions regarding this mechanic and what I think about it as we go through Lunar patches. As always, don't forget to give this video a like and comment so the channel can be noticed by the algorithm. My name is Glitchxcity and I make lore and commentary videos on the channel to keep you company. So the first character ever released with Lunar reaction was Inafa, a shielder and an electrocharge sub DPS that confers the reaction to the Lunar variant called the Lunar Charge. While it is still counted as an elemental reaction, it doesn't gain a lot of benefit from elemental mastery than the normal electrocharge for one reason: this reaction can crit, despite being a transformative reaction. Just for reference, there are 3 types of reactions in this game, that being transformative, amplifying, and additive. Transformative reactions include Overload, Shattered, Electrocharged, Superconduct, Swirl, Burning, Bloom, Hyperbloom, and Burgeon, and this includes Nilu's Bountiful Course, Lunar Charged, and Lunar Bloom. Amplifying reactions include Melt and Vaporize, while additive reactions include Spread and Aggravate. Both amplifying and additive reactions get mixed up a lot, but in short, amplifying reactions means the reaction will multiply the damage, while additive or quicken deals an additional flat damage after the reaction triggers. Keep in mind that both still want elemental mastery, especially quicken, as both amplifying and quicken reactions still scale by them. But with amplifying's case, because the damage is multiplied, attack and critical stats are more favorable, while elemental mastery are usually considered as a secondary stat to focus on from substats. With transformative's case, the damage dealt is based on the character's elemental mastery and their reactions based damage, and the damage can't crit. Base damage increases as the character's level increases, which is the reason why you might hear people say Dendro reactions need to be at maximum level to gain their full benefit. This goes the same with Quicken reaction, where it also wants character level. But unlike amplifying reaction, transformative reactions won't get affected by attack stats. Another thing that makes transformative reactions different is that it ignores the enemy's defense, but still affected by the enemy's elemental resistance. Also, elemental damage bonus has no effect in increasing their damage, so characters like Kazuha and Shilonen have no impact on transformative reaction based teams. Now this is where the Lunar reaction comes into play. All of the known Not Cry characters have this talent called Moon Sign Benediction, where they'll convert the pre-existing reaction to the Lunar variant and increase the party's Moon Sign level by 1 every time there's a character with Moon Sign passive. Inafa and Flints' Moon Sign Benediction converts Electrocharge to Lunar Charged, Llama and Nefer's convert Bloom to Lunar Bloom, while Aino's only increase the party's Moon Sign level without converting pre-existing reaction to the Lunar variant. We'll talk about Moon Sign levels later. You see, Lunar Charged is a unique one because damage-wise, it's actually quite on par with normal Electrocharge, where it's rather pitiful on its own even if it crits. It follows the same formula as transformative reactions, but it removes the critical restriction, allowing it to be affected by the critical rate and critical damage, but significantly decrease the damage scaling from the elemental mastery. However, Lunar Charge can also be triggered directly by some characters from their skills. We call this Direct Lunar Charged, where both Inafa and Flints can trigger them from their skills as long the reaction requirement is met. As per their skill description, their damage also scales from their attack stats. You might hear that Furina and Yalan are worse than Constellation 6 Aino for Flints' team, and if you remember the transformative reaction formula, that's kind of the reason why. Obviously, it's not completely true because Constellation 0 Aino doesn't really give anything for Flints other than the Silken Moon Serenade artifact set, and there's the Moon Sign mechanic that adds even more depth to this gameplay, but we'll talk about that later. This goes the same with Llama, who can trigger direct Lunar Bloom from her elemental skill, and this damage can also crit. However, Llama and Nefer's Moon Sign Benediction talent are a bit misleading because Lunar Bloom can only be triggered as direct Lunar Bloom in instead of turning their course to Lunar Bloom, which basically meant that only Llama and Nefer can trigger this type of damage, while other characters in the party will gain a Verdant Dew every time they trigger Bloom to power up Llama and Nefer's Lunar Bloom damage. If you somehow still can't figure out how it works, you can think of Lunar Bloom like Navia. Navia needs Crystallize to increase her elemental skill's damage, and this goes the same with Llama's elemental skill, where she'll consume all of the Verdant Dews to increase her damage. Never also the same because her Lunar Bloom damage can be triggered when she triggers charge attack to enemies, consuming one Verdant Dew and dealing Lunar Bloom damage to enemies. It's a bit disappointing, yeah, because the only thing that the other party members gain from Lunar Bloom is the Verdant Dew, but on the bright side, Llama still power up Bloom damage from her talents anyway, so whether the damage became Italic and Gradient don't really matter because their damage is still increased regardless. On the other hand, Nefer needs Llama to make her work as intended, but we'll talk about that later. Now I talked about Moon Sign level earlier, and while Aino doesn't wield a Moon Wheel, I mean, I don't know, her vision case is literally the same as the ones with Moonwheel, but anyway, her talent can still increase the party's Moonsign level because of her affiliation from Notcry. Moonsign level is a bit similar to Nightsoul Blessing, where you need a certain amount of Moonsign characters to trigger certain effects. But that's kind of in a nutshell, because unlike Nightsoul Blessing, where each Natlanist benefits from this mechanic significantly the more Natlan characters you have, Moonsign is a bit more forgiving, where you only need 2 Notcry characters in the party. You might also realize there's 2 types of Moon Sign levels, that being Nascent Gleam and Ascendant Gleam. Basically, this is each of Notcry characters' passive talents, where the effects are different the more Moon Sign aligned characters you have. It's important to note that unless it's stated in the character's kit, Nascent Gleam and Ascendant Gleam stacks. So far, most characters in the game only have Ascendant Gleam as the passive talent with Llama that have both, but in her case, she can't trigger both gleams as her kit forbids her to do that. Exclusive to Ascendant Gleam, while you need Notcry characters to have Moon Sign in the party, only non-Moon Sign characters can trigger this effect, and in a nutshell, you still need non-Notcry characters to trigger Moon Sign. Its effect increases Lunar reaction damage up to 36% based on the triggering character's attributes, with every element skills of different stats. This is the reason why, in one way or another, Yelan and Furina are still better than Aino for Flince's team because they can benefit from this buff by becoming the trigger. Even if Aino is at Constellation 6, both Yelan and Furina still provide plentiful amounts of personal damage to the enemies, so their contribution is more than just providing buffs for the Moon Sign, and the difference between them are quite negligible. I would say Yelan is better in this case because she can hold the elegy for the end, where the weapon's effect can increase elemental mastery, but Furina is still a good option because her source of damage is from her elemental skill, and her salon members last really long on field. Just note that you won't be gaining any effect from her elemental burst, and so is Yelan, who won't contribute much damage to Lunar Charge and Lunar Bloom from her A4 passive, so you're likely going to build Furina with full HP instead of the energy recharge sands. To summarize everything, the new Lunar reactions that we currently know are transformative reactions that have additional effects. These reactions can crit, and Lunar Bloom gives Verdant Dew to party members that can be used for characters like Llama to trigger the Lunar Bloom damage. There is a new team party effect called the Moon Sign, where this team effect has different effects depending on the number of Moon Sign characters in the party. Interesting, isn't it? If you ask me, this feels like Nightsoul Blessing-esque, where they still restrict you with specific characters, but they made it a lot more forgiving where you only need 2 characters to fully maximize this effect. Heck, Llama and Innova doesn't need to have Ascendant Gleam to function. Now of course, there's a reason why. And that's because there will be a lot of non-Notcry characters that will be introduced or released during the Song of Welcome Moon patch. So far, we have Farka, Durin, Sandrone, and Alice as the non-Moon Sign characters to trigger this effect. Nicole will likely be wielding a Moon Wheel because she is an angel according to the game's lore so far, therefore she'll likely have the Moon Sign passive talent. It goes the same with the White Horse Adeptus, as she was hinted to be an angel in plenty of sources in game. Judging from how Moon Sign works, it seems they will likely cover all elements for Lunar reactions, making at least one of each element to fully utilize this effect. However, there's also another effect for Durin and Alice where they'll likely have this effect called Hexarray. Basically, a Hex and Circle buff where they'll gain an additional passive when there's 2 Hex and Circle line characters in the party. So far, there's Fischl, Sucrose, Razor, Klee, Albedo, Fenty, Mona, and Durin as the Hex and Circle line characters, and their kit will be directly buffed in the next update. So if Nicole doesn't have the Moonsign passive, she'll likely gain the Hexarray buff instead. As exciting as this is, we can talk about them in another video. Before we continue, do know that these videos took a lot of time and effort to make, so please be sure to give a like and subscribe to this channel because that lets me know that I'm doing a good job. With that said, let's continue. From this point on, I'll be including my opinion about this mechanic. This section will be very subjective, and you are allowed to have your own opinions just as I am allowed to have mine. Just don't be an asshole about it. With that said, I personally find this mechanic significantly better than a Nightsoul Blessing. The fact that you are still demanded to bring non-Notcry characters to the team. The new artifacts can also be used with anyone as long as the Moonsign team effect is active, which is different with the Obsidian Codex and Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City, where only Natlanis can use them. Not only that, this team party effect rewrite the pre-existing reaction rather than a completely different type of mechanic, which what makes Nightsoul Blessing so hated by the community in the first place, where the damage dealt by the Natlanis are different type of damage and usually gets buffed in the Spiral Abyss, demanding you to have Natlan characters in the party. Not only that, not all Natlanis can benefit from this buff anyway, because not all of them are DPS. Heck, even the sub-DPSs like Ororon won't gain a lot of benefit from this buff. Now I know I might glaze the Lunar mechanic, and you are not wrong with that, but based on what we got and my own experience, the mechanic is quite promising so far, where even the non-Notcry characters gain a huge benefit from this particular mechanic. Llama directly buffs Sumeru and Bloom heavy characters, more specifically Nilou, Nahida, Alhaitham, Kuki Shinobu, Virgin Thoma, and Baiju, where these characters benefit from Bloom-related teams, while in Innova's case, characters like Aoife, Sucrose, Ororon, Fischl, Keqing, and many other Electro and Animal characters will gain benefit from this reaction, considering they are also part of the Electrocharge teams back in the past. Hydro characters gain the biggest benefit because they're the triggering element for these reactions, allowing characters like Nilou, Kokomi, Yelan, Furina, and Xingqiu rise in usage even more. To some extent, even Constellation 6 Candice gains a good benefit from this reaction because you want to build her with high HP anyway. It's even more impressive with Aoife because he once cleared the fearless difficulty of the 5.8 Stygian Onslaught with Innova, and he is one of the worst characters in the game as of late. However, there's an interesting thing I find about this mechanic, let alone on how Hoyoverse works. Nefer is a Lunar Blue main DPS, and her kit disables Network Core Detonation, making her anti-synergistic with Nilou unless you have her at Constellation 2 to reduce Dendro and Hydro resistance. It doesn't help that her kit demands her to be at Ascendant Gleam to fully take advantage of her kit, and this makes her want Llama in her team, where Llama's Ascendant Gleam talent increases Nefer's Lunar Bloom damage significantly. You can already guess from the pattern now. They released Innova before Flint's, and this time they released Llama before Nefer. This pattern has been like this for some time now, and it's actually a lot more evident during Fontaine's release, where they released New Valettes before Furina. Albeit, you can't get away from not having Furina for his team anyway, because New Valette is just way too broken and still is until today. In Natslan, the pattern continues on and is actually a lot more aggressive, with Shilonen and Citlali's release for Mavuika, Emily for Kanich, and Escoffier for Skirk. This pattern doesn't stop in Genshin, but also in MiHoYo's other games as well. Honkai Star Rail is the perfect example for this, where the pattern has always been like this ever since Penacony, where they released Acheron prior to Jiaoqiu's release, Firefly before Fugue, Sante before Aglaya, the Hertza before Anaxa, Castoris before Hyacinth, and so on, and so on, and so on. And the pattern continues on until today, where the most recent one is Castoris with Evernight, Finon with Danheng Perman Sortera, and recently they released Cyrene, who is meant to be a universal Chrysos air support, only for her to be mostly effective on Castoris' team because of how her kit works. And also, she's just way too expensive to build because you need her Eidolon 2 or Constellation 2 in Genshin's terms to make her work as intended outside of Castoris' team. Of course, that's not necessarily the point here. The thing that worries me the most is how the Song of Welcome Moon characters will be a lot more beneficial than other characters from the past, and knowing that the Lunar reactions will be meta, this will likely sweep the Nightsoul blessing away because the Nightsoul line damage often gets buffed in Spiral Abyss during Natlan patch. Not only that, there's a huge pattern with the Natlanis, and they're actually built based on raw power instead of reaction-based damage. I mean, they kinda still play reactions, but all of them rely on being a hyper carry build rather than a full-on reaction-based teams. What I meant is something like New Valette and al-ahmar where their teams can dish out damage from reactions, especially New Valette who has the most versatile team options. The only relevant Natlan character that I can think of is Overrun when it comes to this case, which says something. It's also the reason why a lot of Natlan characters were used often in the Abyss because of that Nightsoul line damage buff. I have a lot of Natlan characters with me, and I can confidently say that outside of Mabuika and the supports or sub DPSs, these characters don't perform as powerful as they seem outside of the Nightsoul line damage buff. They're still strong, don't get me wrong, but it just doesn't feel wow or amazing, if that makes sense, you know? It's kinda the reason why I hated this mechanic anyway, and even though I like Natlan, I don't really enjoy the mechanic it has, even though lore-wise, it's accurate. It forces you to only use Natlan characters, or more specifically, the DPSs, and I personally don't enjoy it, just because lore-wise they are strong with the power of friendship doesn't mean they should make it so literal in gameplay either. But that being said, this does not stop in Natlan where there are certain enemies that benefit Lunar reactions or Lunar mechanics. Most of the time, this is not an issue. Even with some enemies that clearly have advantage on Lunar reaction based teams, it only became a problem in the endgame content, but it's not the worst thing ever, at least in my own experience. However, they released one enemy that felt like Shilonen's boss material. The Frost Knight Hera has a mechanic where it'll enter Gloomveiled state, where it'll have 120% resistance to all elements. Not only that, it will then be immune to the most elemental damage it took after reaching certain hits. This, however, will not happen if the most damage it took is Lunar reaction damage or physical damage, which makes it a copium for Eula mains. Now, given this is not necessarily the worst thing ever, especially if you have Innofa, you can easily counter this boss. But other than that, it doesn't count the same way with Bloom teams because Lunar Bloom can only be triggered by Llama and Nefer. Unless they count Verdant 2 generation as Lunar Bloom damage, that's a different story, but unfortunately, it's not. But even so, you have plenty of options to defeat it. For example, you can defeat it ASAP, which usually Skirk and Mavuika's perfect comp can easily do that. Use dual DPS comps, which is not ideal for most scenarios unless you're using Natlan comps with Mavuika. Have your sub DPS do most of the damage while it enters Gloomveiled state, or have Lunar reaction based teams. From my own experience, this boss is not the worst thing ever because it's basically just Aeon Blake but on steroids. It is quite a problem in Stygian Onslaught, but that's about it, and I personally never bothered reaching Dire or Fearless in Stygian Onslaught anyway. From how I see it, it doesn't seem to be a huge problem in most content either, but take it with a grain of salt. But let's face it, power creep is unavoidable, because they still have to make money to sustain the game and the employees. I played a lot of gacha games in my life, and I sort of expected that Genshin would follow the same way because of it being a gacha game. Thankfully, the level 100 requirement is not relevant because the damage increase is extremely negligible even with reaction damage. Because Genshin is a live service game, they have to constantly update the game, and it's not surprising if the game also consistently power creep characters to make the player spend. But I personally don't really see this as a reason as to why I should really consider it as a huge problem because of one thing. I'm gonna say it. It's a PvE game. Player versus the environment. Player versus the AI. As much as I hate the Nightsoul blessing mechanic, I don't really see it as a life or death situation like how a lot of people portray it to be. Sure, the mechanic sucks, but it's not the end of the world either. Besides, I really like a niche, so it's not really a problem for me. And it's okay to complain because I complain about the problems in this game, but you don't have to be so aggressive about it. No need to make life so complicated over games. They're made for your entertainment anyway, and if you can't clear floor 12 of Spiral Abyss or the Fearless difficulty in Stygian Onslaught, just remember that 1 1/4 pull is not worth it. And reroll feathers with no guarantees of desired substats are also not worth it. It's also the reason why I don't force myself to clear Fearless. It's just a huge pain in the ass. My principles is simple. If it doesn't give Primogems, then it's not worth it. If the Primogem reward is just 1 or 2 pulls, then it's also not worth it. It's the reason why I only care about the Imaginum Teacher, because it's the most balanced game mode in my opinion, where it clearly rewards the old-time players as long as you want to invest on your characters. Not only that, I can 100% say there's way worse gacha games out there with even more predatory money-making schemes than this one. Heck, let's not go too far. Honkai Star Rail is literally just that. Cyrene is the literal existence of that being the case. But back to the Lunar mechanic. I think this mechanic has potential because it brings a lot of the older characters back from the dead. They sort of did this with Escoffier, where ever since her release, Risley and Ayaka's usage went up a lot, which is a good thing because this makes older characters more viable. Does this make them better than the new characters? No, they don't. But does this make them a lot more usable? Yes, they are. The good thing about this mechanic is how they only restrict 2 characters, allowing you to use older characters, and everyone in the party benefits from this effect, not just one specific faction, because the Moonsign characters became the enabler, while the non-Moonsign characters became the trigger. Obviously, you need the new characters, but pulling for 1 or 2 characters for everyone else to benefit the same reaction is a good thing, especially after their release. Some of the older characters got additional effects where a lot of blue-related characters benefit Llama, while Oreron and Aoife can benefit Lunar Charge. Some of the pre-existing constellations have added effects as well, like how Mona's first constellation now benefits Lunar Charged. I absolutely love the moments I got Inafa. For the first time ever, I had a lot of fun using characters because Inafa opens new opportunities for me to use characters I neglect. For example, I use Ayato, a character I forgot I even have, and I had a lot of fun using him again because of this Lunar Charge mechanic. Sure, he is not that impressive, but just being able to clear the abyss with him in this day and age is not something I even expected in my yearly bingo list. Not only that, I am able to use Taser Kokomi again, I am able to use Oreron in non-Tasca teams, and my favorite so far, I am able to clear the abyss with Taser Chlorant, which is, by the way, not her best team. Sure, Taser got shield right now, but the point is that the team is just a lot more varied, and I can use them with so many different teams just by having Inafa around. So far, the pattern they do here is by having a support that can be universally used by anyone. Like Inafa can be used in any Taser teams, while Llama can be used in any Bloom teams or even Quick Bloom teams. The unfortunate thing is that the main DPS needs the other character, like how Flint needs Inafa and never needs Llama. Honestly, I'm not too surprised because again, it's part of their business tactic, and logically speaking, if you're pulling for a main DPS, then you would expect that the new support would be the best for the new DPS anyway. Albeit, how they do it is still pretty exhausting. Personally, I don't think they'll stop anytime soon with this kind of business model, but even as someone who spends money in this game, my principle is this: if I can't clear the endgame content for the sake of one pull, then good riddance. I ain't going to sweat in my room if I can just get more pulls from doing dailies. But anyway, that being said, this wraps up the whole video regarding Lunar reactions. I hope you find this video helpful, and don't hesitate to let me know if I missed anything in the comments below. And also don't forget to let me know what you think about it. Jana!